Since the dawn of human history, mankind has looked inside to try and become more than we are, to become faster, stronger, smarter, healthier. But when ethics are put aside and our reach exceeds our grasp, who pays the price? This is human experimentation. This is our Uncanny Earth.
You will notice that we are absent one member of the Uncanny team. Steven, if you're watching this, get well soon, bro. We'll see you next week, hopefully.
He is. He's watching. He's in the chat right now.
Oh, good. I didn't see him in the chat because I was doing all the behind-the-scenes action.
You know, even though he was told to rest.
That boy don't listen. That boy don't listen. He's hard-headed. He's hard-headed. It's hard-headed. They'll learn. Welcome, everybody, to another episode, the newest episode,
Yes,
season opener, like a baseball team or whatever sport you play. This is the season opener of this Uncanny Earth. You saw the new intro. That is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and I discussed it with the fellas, and they thought it was a good idea. So rolling forth, we're going to be putting those intros in to give you a taste of what the show will be about. I mean, the name probably will say a lot of things, but also we'll get into a little bit more descriptive words with it. So You're welcome. Yeah, we're bringing the uncanny funk.
and I apologize for the volume because I did try to lower it, and it was still too loud.
He had that set on that commercial where that guy took the Maxwell tape and he put it into the cassette player, closed it, and then went and sat on the chair behind him with the speakers blasting on him. That's what he did. He's like, "This is it, Maxwell." Yeah, we went there. Elizabeth Wittenberry would have been pleased about our tape cassette reference, since we talked about how to fix those. Shouts out to Elizabeth Wittenberry. Hope she's doing well. Tonight, human experimentation. But is there any announcements you would like to get out of the way before we start, sir?
Nothing major so far. We will have another large partnership announcement coming up very soon. I have to finalize the details on that. If you haven't seen yet, we are already partnering with Musicians Hangout. We're also still partnered with Cooking Basically. We are partnered with my record label, Big Buff Records, and the list should just continue going on. So we're going to continue expanding in all areas of entertainment. So that's upcoming. Anything outside of the show that we want to mention? We're still doing Twitch streams and stuff, so that's fun.
We're all making it happen.
Any events or anything coming up?
No, it's not really that time. Not yet. Maybe October I'll have something. I'm hoping. I was supposed to have something last Saturday, and it got canceled. Like, it got canceled like a month before, and I was like, well, that sucks. So I had that. I was looking forward to that, and then, nothing really.
Cool. We do have I think it's this Saturday, actually. Let me take a look at my calendar here real quick.
The calendar. Let me take a look at his calendar.
Yeah, I got to make sure nothing falls through.
Oleander. Whatever.
It's this Saturday is my next Ask Me Anything event, so I'll be representing the Uncanny team. Various members of the team may or may not roll through, depending. It is going to be late. It's going to be 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 Pacific. So it more than likely will be probably just me, but that's fine. I'll answer anybody's questions. What you got, throw them at me, and we're going to be on for at least a couple hours on both YouTube and on Twitch while I play some games. So we're going to have some fun. So beyond that, I think we're caught up on the business of everything, of giving the business. So let's talk about some sinister business. let's talk about human experimentation. And we're not just talking about people trying to tinker with their biology and do things to become better. We're talking about the other side. We're talking about unethical human experimentation. When a government or an organization steps in and says, "Hey, we've got this new medicine, or we've got this new procedure, or we've got this thing. We need a bunch of volunteers." And they don't tell people exactly what it is or what's going to happen, and they might not even know themselves. So, we are going to get into that. A lot of this subject goes all the way back. As I said in the intro, there, we have a long history as a species of experimenting on ourselves, either through, um, if you want to consider things like early piercings or early tattooing and things like that to put curses against your enemies or to protect you from spirits, that's almost a form of experimentation. If you want to talk about the medicine man or the shaman out there testing different plants, different herbs. Although back then it wasn't meant to be in a way that, well, I don't know what this does, but I want to see what happens, and I don't care if it kills you. There's a lot more of that now. There wasn't as much back then. So now, fast forward to, and we're not going to get too deep into this part. I'm just going to mention it as part of the history. Is Nazi Germany, of course. You had Joseph Mengele doing his experiments. You had the various experiments with the gas chambers and everything they did in the concentration camps. You also had, as we've talked about later on, you had Unit 731. They did a lot of experiments that they really didn't care what the results were going to be. They just wanted to find out what happened. So there's a lot of these things over the years that have happened and that you would think we would develop means to not do that anymore. Maybe put some ethical restraints in place. And there have been at least 2 or 3 attempts. There was the Nuremberg Code, developed after World War II in response to the Nazi experiments. And there was the Declaration of Helsinki, which is regarded by the World Medical Association as the cornerstone document on human research ethics. That went through in 1964. And unfortunately, it is not a legally binding instrument under international law, but various of the so-called civilized nations try to kind of keep it in mind most of the time, or at least for face value. The United States, for one, is still pretty guilty of not always following the law, which we're going to find out through the course of the show. So before I get into some of that, Rob, what do you know about human experimentation? And do you think it has a long lineage of being just more harm than good, or do you think it's necessary?
The second part is rough because there's a lot of breakthroughs we wouldn't have had in modern medicine had those experiments not happened, which sucks. I'm not saying it doesn't suck, but it's kind of that's a tough one because what if that doesn't happen and then a bigger outbreak happens down the line because that wasn't found? It's harder for that. Do I wish it never happened at all? Of course. Obviously, if we could do it that way, but we can't. So now we have to use the information that was given to us from these experiments, extrapolate the data, and use that data to further our research. Because if we just would get rid of it, right, people's lives, you're just throwing people's lives away. At least use their memory to do something better. Obviously, human experimentation without consent is, without a doubt, unethical. I don't think that there's any other reasoning behind that, but I do think that there's not much we could do. I mean, you could use certain types of people, but then what about when that spills over to other types of people and other types of people? People I can't say because we will get hit. So, but people who are not good to children, people who are not good to children, those types of people. So, anyways, that's my thoughts.
And it is also easy for us to look back and say, Well, they never should have done that. There must have been better ways after we now have the results of those experiments for so long. So in hindsight, it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, well we could have come up with different ways to do that without us having been there, without us really knowing the circumstances." There are a few occasions, of course, that are pretty easy to say, "Yeah, that probably wasn't worth it. You probably caused a lot of harm." And the first of our topics for that tonight is going to be one of the most famous that people know about, and that's, of course, the Tuskegee experiment. Um, this was pretty horrific, and it ran for a long time. This ran for 40 years because it was a long term experiment. It was not just one of those, hey, we're going to have you in for a few months, a couple years, monitoring this thing. No, we're going to monitor you for your basically most of your lifespan while we do this. And we're not going to tell you exactly what we did until it's all over, which is where the big issue came from. Now, what was the Tuskegee experiment? It was contracted by the United States Public Health Service in 1932 with the Tuskegee Institute for a long-term study of syphilis. Syphilis was, of course, a serious issue at the time. It still is a serious disease, but you don't hear about it too much anymore. We've come a long way. There's a lot of strides that have been made in sexual protection and education and that kind of thing, but it still crops up once in a while. But it's treatable now. Now, you can say, pointing at this, that this is one of the reasons why it's treatable, but I think this is one of those ends do not justify the means, if I had my personal opinion. During the study, more than 600 African American men, specifically African American men, were studied who were not told they had syphilis. And in an effort to better understand the disease, researchers denied the men access to antibiotics and known treatment methods, most likely penicillin. They recorded observations of the effects of the disease over time, and the participants were told that they were being treated for bad blood and given free health care from the government. And the health care was, of course, them trying to figure out about syphilis and see the effects on the human body and basically just trying to treat it while prolonging it for as long as possible. They gave ineffective treatment to some of the subjects. 2/3 of the group had died by the end of the 40-year experiment. And only when results of the experiments leaked in 1972 did they cease the study, and there were legal ramifications. Now, this has been referred to as the most infamous biomedical research study in U.S. history, but it's not the only one. It's just one of the ones that are the most famous. And because it got found out, subsequent experiments, one or two that I'm going to talk about, were a bit more secure and difficult to suss out. And so this kind of thing still goes on. It is not, oh, we learned our lesson, we're not going to do it anymore, we're going to continue. They try to defend it by proposing risk benefit analysis, which is ends justify the means. They try to show, hey, if we hadn't done this, we wouldn't have learned all of this. If they'd have been clued in, they might not have given us the data we needed. A lot of, as I said, 2/3 of the participants died, and there were 600 total participants. That's a lot of people. And yeah, it's over 40 years, and maybe you can say, well, that's not as many over the course of 40 years, but that's still a lot of people. And as I said, it's not going to be the first time that this happens. But let's take a pause for a minute. Let's discuss this a minute or two. First off, I'm going to ask Rob, do you think this was a case of ends justify the means? Do you think they were justified in getting the data that they did the way they did?
No, because they thoroughly believe that the syphilis affected black men via the central nervous system, And then the white man, it was infected in a different part of his nervous system. I forget which one it was. I watched a little bit before the show. And they were like, well, aren't both of them human? So we'll have the same effect. That's just wild. No, because it's not like they're trying to figure out, in my opinion, given everything that's been happening lately. Back then, they were just trying to find something maybe to put in the water or something to eradicate people who maybe disagree with them. So maybe they found a way to weaponize that said syphilis so they can put it in water. I don't think that it all it's just a product of racism, to be quite frank. It's a product of racism. We look down on you because I'm sure the question was asked, well, why not white men that have syphilis, right? And they're like, the white man, no. It's just a product of racism and hatred, just racism and hatred, man, and ignorance. And it's a damn it's a damn shame that we as Americans are doing that, and probably still doing it to this day. So who knows?
I agree with that. I looking at the data makes very clear that they were focused specifically on obviously just African Americans. And if you were trying to do a widespread study on the disease itself, you want as wide a pool of candidates as you can get. But obviously they didn't. And they only chose males. They didn't choose females. They didn't choose, it was one specific kind of person who was potentially giving them issues at the time, and then upwards into the civil rights movement and all of that, so they would continue it. And that just throws the whole thing into perspective, because it really, whatever good data you might get out of that, you still have tainted the data in a way by not including a wider pool of people, by not being actually scientific about it, and by letting your biases direct how you were going to conduct it to begin with. I had another question and now it's gone. So I'm going to try to remember it before.
I'll just drop in a quick side note on this too, is that, they didn't even cure them. It'd be one thing, if they tried to provide a cure maybe 3-4 weeks in, but they just basically, it was a death sentence. We're pretty much doing this until you die. And then after you die, they're going to use your body to ascertain if the study was a success. So they got you. That's it. And it's just cruel. We were supposed to learn not to do things, after World War II. But yeah, we still did them.
And that's an interesting point, because we have to remember that, especially leading up after World War II, which was within the test framework, I'm sure we acquired some of those scientists, and they possibly got involved because we picked up all of the German scientists. For people always just assume, oh yeah, it's because of the aeronautics and the atomics and the technology. But we got all of their chemists, we got all of their biological scientists, we got a whole lot of people who didn't end up going through the Nuremberg trials because they worked with the United States and were probably directly involved with the death camps. And I find it hard to believe that they might not be involved in a study like this, especially considering, it's all African Americans. We come from Germany, where we believed, of course we don't now, you saved us, we don't believe it now, but we believed they were less than human. So
they still believe that.
Study. They still believe that. All that expertise, I'm sure, was leveraged into this. So the Tuskegee experiment was definitely, it was tragic. It led to the creation of a bureau, which I don't, who's to say how effective this really is? It might just be just public face, but it led to the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, Big name for something, which was tasked with establishing the boundary between research and routine practice, guidelines for participation, and the definition of informed consent. Um, it created a report called the Belmont Report, which established 3 tenets of ethical research: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Now, that all sounds good on the face of things, but as we're going to continue, we're going to see that it's not always been followed. The next thing I'm going to talk about, and I mentioned this before we got to talking, that I know Deadpool out there, Mr. Steven, I think he's going to love that I'm talking about this. We're going to talk about MK Ultra, Project MK Ultra, which a lot of people believed for the longest time that it was straight up conspiracy theory. They didn't believe it was a real thing. Some people still don't. Some people believe it's not a thing that happened, but we have the documentation. We have the evidence that it happened. We have people on record that have said that it happened. And it's another example of a government, specifically, again, in this case, the United States, doing things that it believes is beneficial for itself while not worrying about who it's experimenting on. Before I get into it, I know you've probably heard about it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Have you heard about Project MK Ultra? And what do you want to say about it before we get into the details?
Well, I can't say a lot because I was told not to talk about it. Um, you know, but what I think is interesting is because I watched some of the videos today about people who were experimented on with LSD and things of that nature to produce hallucinogenic effects and brainwashing techniques. It's very interesting how they broke people. You could see the brokenness in their eyes, like they're just that's it. Like they don't know how to function anymore, and it goes deep. This is a very deep, deep dive, as the kids like to say, and I'm excited to hear you talk about it. So
I encourage everybody with these topics, because we're only really touching on the most basic stuff to fit within the time frame of the show here, of course. But there is so much more to learn about each of these. There's a lot of data about Tuskegee. Definitely look into it if you're interested. MK Ultra, there's rabbit holes all over the place about this that leads to all kinds of different things. Some of it is pretty hefty in the conspiracy area, but again, this is a documented program that did happen, so there is a lot of truth in there too. So if you're interested in it, definitely follow up. But MK Ultra was the code name given to a illegal program of experiments on human subjects. It was never formally avowed as, yes, of course, we're standing behind this as the government. It's one of those things where if you get found out, we're going to deny everything that you did. Unfortunately, they couldn't get away from it because now we know what they did. But it was designed and undertaken by the CIA. Experiments on humans were intended to identify and develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogations and torture in order to weaken the individual to force confessions through mind control. Now, there's a lot of fiction out there for people who are interested in seeing dramatized versions of this. The Manchurian Candidate is a pretty good movie. Actually, both of them are. There's an original one, which I don't remember what year that came out, which is pretty good. But there's
60s,
also
like 60s, 70s.
like
I think that one came out.
There's a remake with Denzel Washington that is actually pretty darn good.
Fantastic.
Also. It's a great movie, and it's not entirely all factual, but it is pretty interesting, and it's what they were going for, regardless of how much fiction and how much fantasy they added to it. That's what the government really wanted to do. So, it was organized through the Scientific Intelligence Division of the CIA, and it was coordinated with the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps, which gives you a big indicator of how they were trying to induce this stuff. Truth serums and various other chemicals were starting to get to be the thing. A lot of that was becoming, hey, you know what? We've got this new thing. It's supposed to force somebody to tell the truth. Oh, it's supposed to force somebody to do this. Let's test them out. Let's see what we can do. A lot of governments were getting in on that. So I'm going to let Rob talk about it here.
What happened? You went full New Jersey. I'm gonna let Rob talk
Yeah,
about it here.
I slipped into my streamer voice over there.
I wanted to also let people know the reason they did this is because they got some people back from, I think, Korea, and they were brainwashed Americans. And they said, oh no, communism's found a way to brainwash people. We have to get on this ASAP so we can unlock their secrets from what they know.
Mm.
And then they just started experimenting on people like in different countries. Canada, for instance, they experimented on people in Canada.
Mhm.
Anyways, yeah, I just wanted to say that because we have to have a reason why they would just all of a sudden want to start trying to brainwash people. So
Yeah. It began in the early 1950s. So it was during the time of the early quote unquote Red Scare. And it was when communism was popping up a lot of different places. And we were involved in Korea. We were watching Russia. And there were a lot of double agents and secret things going back and forth. And it's one of those things where it was defended because of national security, of course, as many things are. But it who knows? But it was begun in the early 1950s, officially sanctioned in 1953. They ended up reducing it in scope in 64, and they officially halted it in 73. Now, that's an interesting date point because, again, the Tuskegee experiment ran until 72. So in the 70s, people started becoming more aware of these things. There were more whistleblowers. There were more people willing to be like, hey, I saw this thing happen. I'm going to tell everybody. And it's not particularly a coincidence that a lot of these programs supposedly ended in the 70s. Of course, some of us know in the 80s, a lot of military stuff, they got hardened communications equipment, and a lot of other things that happened from then on. That's when the United States military really started getting more secretive about everything. So the 70s were an important time for both sides of this spectrum here. Now, the program in particular, as Rob mentioned, it used both US and Canadian citizens as its test subjects, which led to controversy regarding its legitimacy. It used numerous methodologies to alter brain function, including administration of drugs without telling the person, such as slipping them into your food and drink, or calling it, oh, this is a vaccine, or this is a booster shot, or this is this. LSD was one of those things. And they used other chemicals. They used hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse. Now, see, that's where things get like, there's a point where you can say, okay, you're testing this stuff maybe, but no. At that point, somebody's getting their rocks off and just having fun with people. And that's not,
they're basically
can't
playing
condone
with
that.
them.
And that's a form of torture. And so the legacy of MK Ultra is still here. There's always the attempt to try to turn people from other countries or other governments or from criminal organizations and be like, hey, you should do this for us. Because if they don't say yes, how are you going to convince them? Sometimes money doesn't work. Sometimes threats of violence don't work. What are you going to do? There's still a lot of stuff out there that's being used to convince people. We've got waterboarding. We've got a lot of things that just, while they don't overtly look like they're torture because they're not directly hurting you, they're messing with your brain. They're messing with your mind. And so the long-term effects of MK Ultra are still here, despite everything. Now, Rob, we're going to turn it back around here. Do you think at any point a program like MK Ultra can be justified if the circumstances were right? Like, let's say we're at war with an enemy, like directly, not just the standoff with us in Russia or something like that, or with us in China. Let's say we're directly at war with somebody. It's a stalemate. You got to find a way to do it. Do you think it's justified, or do you think it's still going too far? Can't hear you.
Sorry. In my brain, I'm reminiscent of Mass Effect, Nerd Alert, and how they treated the biotics.
Mm.
And so it would be very similar to that. Much like the Spartan program in Halo and how they experimented on them. You know what I mean? So, like, of course, it was a better, you know what I mean? Like, it provided the ability to defeat certain things.
Mm.
But did the ends justify the means? In this case, or in that case, yes. In this case, no. Because you're not doing anything for the betterment of somebody. You know, at least when you were training biotics or you're training Spartans, you're training them to protect your civilization. What are you doing to these people but just breaking them mentally and seeing if you can break them even further? And then rebind them to whatever belief or system you have in place so they don't ever get out of line. And we do see that kind of thing happening today. So, and we have to remember too, the United States government actually got the media playbook from Goebbels.
Mm-hmm.
They,
Again,
you know,
from Nazi scientists.
so it's like, and people say, well, this, that, and the other, and like to call each other Nazis. But the reality is the government is using Nazi tactics to keep people in line. I mean, let's call it what it is. You know, if we're going to get banned from here, fine. We'll just pop back up again, you know? So for me, it's like, hey, no, this isn't right. You know?
I agree. It's another one of those cases where do the ends justify the means? And in most cases they don't. But also at the same time, it's easy for us to look back and while I don't want to excuse any of that, it is easy for us to look back and say that was clearly wrong without being there at the time. But another important thing I want to point out before we move on to the big one, which is going to be a little bit I got to talk carefully about that one. Not because I'm worried about anybody getting upset or getting mad, but because of the various algorithms that key off of certain words and phrases.
This guy got me a strike.
We don't
Let's
want to
just
do that.
put it out there.
We don't want to do that again. But before we get to that, let's talk about the Beecher paper. The Beecher paper is a pretty important it's a study of studies. And it made a big difference, as far as we're aware, on protecting people's rights during various attempted experiments. The Beecher paper is a 1966 paper by Harvard anesthesiologist Henry K. Beecher, and he described 22 published medical studies in which patients had been subjects with no expected benefit to the patient of the experiment. And of course, that was classified as unethical because the experiments were done without care for the people involved. They were done without worrying about what the effects would be on the people involved. They were just to find things out. And one of his examples was that there were patients infused with live cancer cells, and they had been told in one study that they were receiving some cells without being told that this was cancer. They were just told, oh, yeah, we got some, experimental stuff we're going to put in whatever. Now, even though the identities of the authors and institutions in many of these studies had been stripped, they were later identified as having been conducted by mainstream researchers and published in prestigious journals within approximately the previous decade. And the 22 cases had been selected from a set of 50 that Beecher had collected. And so he had been writing about human experimentation and publicizing the cases that he considered to be bad practice. He was instrumental in developing solutions to such abuses, and he noted that a common element in these studies was that some experimental subjects, such as military personnel or mentally handicapped children in institutions, which is already enough to get the hackles up and get the fires burning, were not in a position to freely decline consent because they didn't understand or because they were under orders. In the case of the military, it was like, hey, you're going to go through with this because we told you to, and you're going to serve your country, and that's it. He believed that the rules requiring informed consent were not alone sufficient, as truly informed consent was an unattainable ideal, and he worked both to define the rules and conditions and to establish institutional review boards to help continue with oversight. Now, I like that. I like that there was somebody that was like, hey, this is bullshit, basically. We need to do better. We need to have protections in place for people, especially for the people who they can't say yes or no, because maybe you're studying a specific mental condition. And in order to study that, you have to get people who might not be aware of what's going on, but somebody needs to stand up for those people and decide if it's worth it. Rob, had you heard about the Beecher paper in the past? And do you think it's been effective up till now in potentially preventing some of these previous cases from happening again?
Once again, we are taken back to is does a squared plus b squared equal c squared in this situation? Once again, I don't think so. I think there's ways to go about things in a more humane manner. With people that I think would volunteer for that. You know what I mean? For some things, not for everything, mind you. But I think if somebody's terminally ill, they might say, "Hey, put some more cancer cells in. What's the worst that's going to happen?" But if you're not telling people, this is the problem I have. You're not telling people. You're being shifty and shisty, and you're not living up to your Hippocratic oath, and that's important. So I think once again, it's hard for me to say ends justify the means here because of the lack of consent. This is being done to you and you're not even willing to, you can't even consent to it. That's my number one issue here. I don't think the ends justify the means. I just do not think they do.
And I think we're definitely going to be in agreement for a lot of that, as well as most of the people that watch, that's just, you can't condone certain things in the name of trying to better science. You brought up a good point. If you have people who are, I have a terminal disease, I'm going to die within the next few months or a few years, what do I got to lose from it? You might even cure it. So whatever, worst comes to worst, I still meet my end the way I was going to anyway. Best of the best, maybe I'll get a cure. Who knows? So go ahead. But that's people still that are agreeing to the experiments. It's still people who are saying, yeah, sure. It's not like you're collecting all of these people and telling them, you ain't got any choice because you're all going to just be dead in a week. Who cares? So we're going to do this and you're just going to like it, or who cares because you're going to be dead. So consent is definitely important. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, and I don't want to get into the deep conspiracy stuff.
There we go, guys. If you don't see us next time, we got shut down.
I don't want to get into the deep, like, it's all, this is what happened behind the scenes, because there's still a lot of uncertainty behind all of that. And there's still a lot of bad feelings. It's still pretty recent. Leading into that, let's take a brief moment to talk about gain of function research. You might have heard this term over the last few years, specifically between 2020 and 2023, because that's the time period where a lot of this stuff happened. This is something that's been happening a lot longer than that. It's just this is when it became news. Gain of function research refers to scientific studies that modify an organism's genetic makeup to enhance its capabilities. Now, at first glance, you'd think, oh, yeah, it makes things better. That's cool. Make me better. Make me tougher. This is talking about viruses. This is talking about diseases. The attempt is to increase its transmissibility or its virulence. Supposedly, it's primarily conducted to better understand pathogens, predict potential outbreaks, and develop medicines and therapeutics. Of course, the word that I'm going to use is medicines rather than the actual word because it's too easy for YouTube to just be like, oh, my AI said to use this word, and so the AI is correct. Boom, your channel's done. So, for example, introducing mutations in a virus to study its ability to infect different hosts can provide insights into how to combat future pandemics. On the surface, you might think, okay, I could see that. Whereas I see that and I go, oh no.
Wait a minute.
No,
I
no, no,
did
no,
this
no.
in Resident Evil. I literally did all of this, and no, this is not the thing you do. You
Let's
don't do
not do
this
this at
thing.
all. I
This
mean,
is the thing we don't do.
there's one thing where you want to study, like, oh, we want to study how these viruses work and mutate, but it's another thing to help them do so. And so that leads me into the events between 2020 and 23, which we still don't have a clear picture of, particularly. There's still a lot of stories on both sides. In 2020, the first recorded cases of the C19 virus, that's what I'm going to call it because that's not something that's going to get picked up, were supposedly detected in China, initially blamed on the wet market. Somebody ate a bad bat. As all of that went on, we found out that there was a gain of function research laboratory in that area of China studying the exact kind of disease using bats. Now, you can draw your own conclusions about that. Again, there's a lot of compelling evidence that it was a lab escape versus it just happened to end up in the market from a bat that had the disease. There is a lot of compelling evidence either way, and I'm not here to point you in a certain way on that. I want to make it clear I'm not trying to influence anybody's opinions or whatever on that, but it is interesting, coincidentally, that you had the laboratory with that particular disease, with the particular transmission method, and that was the area where people came down with the disease. Now, my point that I'm making here is not about the release of the disease. My point is the development of the medicine. Again, using the right terms, not getting kicked off. When most medicines of this type, as have been said before, are developed, they're developed over a number of years. Generally, it takes 10 years to make sure that something's effective and make sure it works. In this case, it was weeks, maybe months at the most before there was a medicine out. Everybody come get it, put it in. Now that raises the question because now we're at a point where various institutions are saying, don't give this to kids under a certain age. Don't give this to pregnant mothers. Where at the time it was said, yes, give it to everybody. Everybody has to have it. And now we're looking back and again, not talking conspiracy, but talking about real world things that have been reported recently. It has been causing some side effects, a number of heart related side effects. Now the question comes up, because this has been raised as conspiracy more than once, and I find it compelling. I don't want to say that it's true, but I find it compelling that the development of the medicine was itself a broad case of human experimentation, that it was released quickly on purpose without knowing exactly whether it was going to work or not, because they wanted to see in the real world if it was going to work. It's not unheard of for things like this to happen. We have evidence of it in the past that we've covered. So my question is, Rob, without again getting too deep into it and without everybody getting too opinionated and things, trying to stick to just logically what we know factually, what are the chances, do you think, that something like this or in any other instance could be just a very broad experiment to see what happens? It is a tough question to answer without getting into a rabbit hole.
I think it ends up looking as a bioweapon, to be quite honest. I mean, that's really the next evolution of warfare. You know, we've always done it, but I think that's the next step with a lot of these places in the world that harbor resentment for mankind. I think that it could have been early stages of a bioweapon. We don't know this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very odd, right, that it was through bats, if that's the case. There were so many things coming out at that time, and we have that nation putting like boarding people in their homes, like straight up just hammering nails into their doors so they can't leave. Like, what is that about? The epicenter of the outbreak, that should have been studied. That's when the WHO, that's when every other nation says, we're coming in here and we're going to look at this. And if you don't let us in here, we're going to destroy your country. And you don't think we can do it, we can do it. So either you let us in or we have a problem. That's it. There should have been no excuses. There should have been no nothings. If the epicenter of your place has caused something of, millions of deaths, people with long-term issues, people that will always be sick because of this what I believe to be engineered incident, right? To me, just screams we need to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, now it's been cleaned up. There's probably no record of anything we could even see, or maybe there is. Maybe there's record somewhere. But the fact that like this should have been instantaneous.
Yeah.
We have a United Nations for a reason. Everybody should have came in accord, in agreement, and said, okay, we're coming in. We have all of these countries surrounding you, and we will invade if we have to. We will do what we have to do to get to that epicenter. And if you touch it and we find out that you've touched it, we're going to break your country. We are going to break your country via sanctions. You will never get anything imported or outported here again. So if you're honest and you're up and up, then let us through. If you're not, then now we've got a problem. Now these are high level war crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're not in war, they would be treated as such.
Yeah.
You've killed people from many nations. You've caused mass panic, mass hysteria, and maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe that was the end game for all of this, for society to topple as a whole. See, we don't know, and that's my key concern is that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know many studies on Ground Zero. I just think people lost their minds at that time, and to take it a step further, people, the after effects of all of this, and then to be rushed with a miracle elixir so fast didn't sit right at all. You had people developing different reactions, heart problems, myocarditis, I think it's called, things like that. They were developing these things. And, and it was just like, I don't. And the manipulation was strong because it was like, oh, if you don't do X, you're not a good Y. You're a horrible Y. Go to prison camp. Because not only was it an experiment on humanity, it was an experiment on humanity in a social setting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this might be just me, but I think each of us all went a little nuts during that time, and I think that in itself too was an experiment. What happens to society when we keep them locked up or keep them from getting anywhere? We stop everything. I don't driving wasn't anything. There was no cars on the road at the time, and I don't know. It just seems so much more of just an outbreak of a, genetically mutated or genetically engineered situation. And
I think, and I agree with you definitely on the psychological, social aspects of it. I think that's really the legacy of what ended up happening. I think the effects, while yes, a lot of people did lose their lives, and I don't want to discount anything about it. I'm not going to get into what I think about that versus what the records say, but I think psychologically is where the real damage is, because people's social structures are different now. They might not seem like it, but they are. We all stand a little bit farther away from each other at the grocery store now because we've kind of been trained to do it with the circles on the floor and all that other kind of stuff.
mm,
We There's still people walking around with masks on wherever they go, and again, I'm not judging anybody.
no, it's a free country. You can wear it, you know?
And they could very well have a legitimate reason for all that too. I don't want to downplay anything, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that you see it, whereas you didn't before. You still get people who won't go places. They won't go to large social gatherings that they might
Yep.
have used to. They might have gone out to see a concert, or they might have gone out to a restaurant, and now they don't, because they might not even consciously have any fear of anything. They might not have this thought that I'm constantly thinking that there's a disease out there. It might just be because, well, there was this thing that happened, and it's just better off if I don't do these things because I'll just be safer that way. It's just an easy just click in the brain that and there's a lot more suspicion. There's a
Yes.
lot more suspicion, not just of people being sick, but of everything.
Of everything.
And
Yes.
I am not going to talk specifically about anything that has happened in the last few days. I'm just going to make a vague statement that that's the outcome of some of this, that everyone is
Yes.
suspicious of everyone.
Yes.
And it's unconscious now. It sits in there. You see people and you kind of just shy away from them if you don't know them. And if they say something you don't like, then you start getting kind of like, they said something that wasn't good. And it's there's a lot of resentment and there's a lot of simmering things. And I believe that what happened between 20 and 23, that period, it definitely pushed a lot of people's mindsets in that direction to the negative. And I don't know if we're really going to recover anytime soon, because as that goes on, there's still more chipping away at it. You still have all of the various things going on in politics right now. You have the things going on overseas. You have everything just keeps chipping away at that psychological thought that you cannot trust the person standing next to you for some reason, whether they were a friend of yours or family, or whether they're just some random person. And that, I think, is definitely part of the experiment. I believe there was some kind of, I don't know if there's an end goal, to be honest. I think it's constantly monitored. Like, let's just watch how this goes from here on out and just let it do what it's doing. But all that being said, some final thoughts as we're going to wrap up here. There are many other instances that I haven't spoken about of human experimentation that did include legitimate volunteers and did include people looking to say, hey, we've got to eradicate this disease. We have to fix this situation. We have to, help make our fellow man better. And you don't hear about that because, of course, whether it goes wrong or it goes right, it was done above board, and you can't say a lot of conspiracies about it so much. But there is a lot going on, and I think to some degree, you have to run certain experiments on people who volunteer because it's the only way to find out. You'll never know from simulations because it's not biology. And it's a really difficult line to cross. I don't condone anything that is specifically designed to be like, we're going to fill you up with this disease and see how it goes. And if you volunteer, well, that's great. That makes everything fine. I don't agree with that. I think there should always be the attempt to cure things or to make people more comfortable or to improve their quality of life somehow as part of the experiment. Um, but that's my thoughts on that. Rob, do you believe that it is necessary to experiment on humans and animals and other different creatures to find out the results of certain things? Or do you believe maybe even with AI coming up, we'll be able to avoid doing that kind of thing in the future?
So I used to be a big human experimentation fan. Like, I used to think that certain individuals that have committed certain crimes against the innocent should be experimented on. And as I still disdain that group of people, my thought went from, okay, well then what if they start targeting other people, political opponents, and then it's a slippery slope to designate one group of people without eventually everybody else. Oh, you don't like me? Cool. We're gonna experiment on you. And I think that is concerning. And I think, honestly, I think it's barbaric. I think experimenting on animals is barbaric. I think we have enough technology now. We don't have to do that anymore. Um, that we have enough computing technology where we can pretty much know what's going to happen if we do X, Y, and Z. We don't need a specimen at this point, especially with AI becoming where it's going, and a positive society that we should be having, but we don't, because like you said, we don't trust each other. And I'll get into that in a second. It's never going to be technology for everybody. It's going to be technology to be against everybody. And a lot of it will be at a premium. So we have to understand this moving forward with our society because of the events of 20 to 23. And I do want to say the events of yesterday were very much a cowardly act, and that once we as a nation get to a point to where we're taking out people who don't believe the same as us, but are peacefully explaining what they're doing, and people have to worry about dying because of that, we're in a very bad time. I don't condone it. I don't agree with it. I believe you should be able to say whatever you're allowed to say. We live in a society where we debate, we have free thinking. We took a lot of our stuff from Greece where they would have open philosophical debates. And we're trying to do the same, and it's either some scumbag online that's already being a horrible human being about the event. I don't care if you believe the same things that man believed. Okay, I don't care if you believe what Charlie Kirk did or did not believe. There's no excuse to kill someone over ideas. There's no excuse. And it just shows us, especially on the anniversary of such a important day for the United States, when we united together on that day and said, hey, we're Americans, we got to unite. We are a shell of what we used to be in that regard. And for that to happen really shows that we live in more of a post-distrust civilization than we ever have. And I blame 100% social media for all of this. I was at the gym today, and a girl showed me the video of it happening. And in my head, I'm thinking, when did we become this? Where it's just we have to video everything all the time. I think we need to shut social media off. I think we need to start exposing people who are doing these horrendous things to other human beings. And I think we need to put them on full blast, put their pictures everywhere, plaster them things everywhere. Tell people the truth. That's it, man. Like I got to take a stance as a man. I got to take a stance, especially in this day and age. We got to put our feet down and say, hey, this is a free country. We have freedom of speech. And they'll say, well, no freedom from consequences. We have freedom from consequences in regards to ideas, when ideas are being discussed and civil debates are happening. That's the only way we increase in intelligence as a nation, is by civil debates. And listen, I'm all for, if y'all can't agree, just fight. All right, just put your fists
Put
up,
on the gloves and
have a little fist fight.
Yeah.
That's what they do in parliament in European countries, bro. Do you know how much I would love to see that happen in ours? Oh my gosh, somebody just got hit with a chair. That's horrendous.
Sanders with a steel chair.
But things get resolved. You don't go taking somebody's life because you don't agree with what they say. And I really want to see the corporations that he made upset enough to where, okay, this we can't let a person have this voice anymore, because if they do, it's going to upend what we're working on. And we've seen it happen in history, and I can point to specific examples.
Mhm.
So I'm taking a stand. Obviously, my views are my own. I want to make that very, very clear. They're not part of my co-host. If they are, they are. But my views are my own. I just want that to be known.
And that's an important point. Everybody has the right to believe whatever they want to believe. And you can say that certain ideas said in public are dangerous, but it's, they're only dangerous if they get acted upon in a violent way.
Yes.
And if they're not being acted on in a violent way, then what's the point? You can ignore them. Who cares? If somebody says something you don't like, who cares? Say something that they don't like. Whatever, If somebody throws a punch, okay. But there's no reason to go around murdering people. So
not at all.
But so that's it. That's what we've got next week. Next week we have biomedical engineering with that guy right over there.
This guy,
extension of the experimentation.
One of my personal favorites. We'll be talking about some nanotechnology and ways that they can clone joints, and not the kind of joints some of you out there thinking, you party bakers.
It's legal in Ohio now.
Legal now, so we can say that. But yeah, I'll be getting into some of that. I also want to really get into, like, there's a I don't know if you remember this, a few years ago, well, probably like 10 years ago, Deus Ex worked with somebody to give them a new arm, and it was such a dope thing. It was so cool. I was like, this is exactly what I want to see happen with gaming companies, not them talking about this, whatever they support. I want to see actual scientific increases with things like this. They're going to help somebody have that function, or, with their legs or their arms. But we'll also get into some of the ethical things regarding that. Where does it stop? And if it starts making sports players better, do we have to fix up the different leagues? How does that work? And we'll be getting into a lot of that next week. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be a good one.
Exciting.
It's going to be a good one. So that's it for us. I hope everybody's enjoyed. If you have any questions, comments, or if you want to weigh in on any of the things that I talked about, if you want to talk about the 20 to 23 events that happened and you disagree or agree, by all means, as long as you don't come at me being like, I'm open to having a great conversation with you.
Those are some harsh words.
Don't be a jerk about it. Even though I'm a jerk face, I will not be a jerk face to you if you're not a jerk face to me.
Because he's already a jerk face to me, so it takes up a lot of his energy.
That's right. So drop a comment on this video. I'd love to hear more. We'd love to discuss more with you. And until then, of course, we're going to lead out. So back to this guy for the phrase that you know when you love.
Why be boring? Just kidding. Why be boring when you could be uncanny? We will see all of you fine and beautiful folks next week. Thank you for tuning in. Next week, biomedical engineering with me and with my co-host, Steven.
The return of the Steve.
The Steve. He's a whole noun at this point. He's a whole noun. All right, time to go. Bye.